What's up, everybody? Thralls Metal here once again. I'm Nick, and I am back with some more States of Metal. And this time we're going to go back to the Midwest. We are going to go to Missouri, also known as the Show Me State and the Cave State, because there's like over 6,000 of them, and the Mother of the West. These are all their nicknames, and combine them into one, you get the Show Me Your Mother's Cave State. Specifically, the city of St. Louis is known as the Gateway to the West, which is pretty cool. They got the giant arch there, which if you're at the top of that, A, that's absolutely terrifying, and B, I recommend you look west because it's probably way more scenic than looking east, because then you see East St. Louis, which is terrifying, but also Illinois' problem. Though don't go thinking like St. Louis is, super safe either. It's just below Detroit and Baltimore in terms of crime. Though don't worry, I'm sure there's plenty of crime in Kansas City as well, which again, Kansas City is in Missouri rather than Kansas, even though there is a section of Kansas City in Kansas, but it's not the one that we refer to. Again, this is the US. We're not a super bright people. I know most people think Kansas City and they think the Kansas City Chiefs, which, if you're in the Kansas City limits, I'm sure you love them. And if you're any other place in the United States, I'm sure you absolutely hate them right now. This is probably going to go up well after the Super Bowl, so I don't know. Who knows? Who fucking cares? Anyway, back to the state as a whole. This is the birthplace of ragtime, the birthplace of the Pony Express, and surprisingly, the birthplace of the first parachute jump, which yet again is a thing that I would never want to be the first one to actually attempt. Luckily, I guess the state was also the first one to learn how to properly pack a parachute too. That's convenient. Now, while the state is like part of the Midwest, I've always considered it kind of like being on the border of the South and the Plain States. Like it's like kind of smack dab in the middle. I mean, it looks like the Midwest pretty much, except it definitely gets tornado alley weather. Like there's some fierce tornadoes that have rolled through that state before, the Joplin one in particular. Man, that was covered all over the news, and that was absolutely terrifying. But the state has also given us some really cool things that we've probably taken for granted and probably didn't know were from Missouri. Namely, ice cream cones. They were technically invented at the World's Fair in Missouri. The vendor selling ice cream ran out of cups, and they asked the person making waffles, hey, could you do me a favor? And they pressed out some cones and bam, they started serving them right there. Can you imagine being the first kid getting an ice cream cone? Like, oh my God, what is this? Like, oh yeah, the whole thing, all this ice cream sitting in, you can fucking eat it too. That's sugar on top of sugar, bro, and we're not even upcharging you because we haven't figured out how to do that yet. The state is also home to famous people like Jesse James, Mark Twain, and Robert Wadlow, which was the world's tallest person. I believe he stood 8'11". You would need a Sherpa on your way up to high-fiving this dude. Seriously, he was huge. And of course, because it's a state, there are weird laws, because I love looking up all these weird laws that, may or may not be entirely true, probably rarely ever enforced, but of course, there were some strange ones once again. Like for one, it is illegal to drive with an uncaged bear. Also, highly unrecommended, I imagine. Now, I would like to think that there was like an isolated incident and they're like, yeah, let's just make a law just in case, but this is the US. It probably happened multiple times. Now, I don't know what the extenuating circumstances on any of these situations with an uncaged bear in the car is, or truck, or whatever, but I can't imagine the persons that chose this course of action, they were that bright or sane. Now, I'm not entirely sure if it is the entire state or just particular cities, but Missouri likes to tax single men without children between 21 and 50. Now, more commonly in the United States, you get a tax break for, bearing crotch fruit. Here in Missouri, they punish you for not having kids, which it seems pretty ridiculous. I just feel like I'm doing my part not to litter the planet with more people because, well, people, they kind of suck. Like seriously, there's just way too many people. And I don't like a lot of them. So yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. Also ridiculous, in the city of Columbia, Missouri, you are not permitted to put up clotheslines to hang clothes or anything like that, but like somehow you're allowed to hang your clothes on a fence. Like I really can't think of an argument there where like the clotheslines are doing something so terrible or inconvenient or really anything that they needed a law like this, but at the same time it's fine for you to just like hang your underwear on your fence, and that's just totally okay. And the last one I found, and it's just particularly strange and like totally nonsensical, in the town or city of Marshall, single men are not allowed to own a pet rabbit, without a permit. Now it said specifically single men, single women. You can fucking have as many rabbits as you want, I guess. But single men, nah, we're sketchy and weird and we need a permit to own a rabbit. Otherwise, something happens. I don't know. Why was this law made? I ask myself this question whenever I go over any of these laws from any of these states. But sometimes they're just so strange. You just sit there and stare at the computer screen and scratch your head like, why was that turned into a law? Why was that even brought up? Who's just trying to keep single men and rabbits apart? Like, it just seems weird. Anyway, the state is also loaded with a lot of killer metal, and honestly, I was kind of surprised as to like how many really cool bands came out of Missouri. The state really has a solid metal scene, and it's kind of varied too. Like, there's a lot of different styles in this stack in particular. And I'm going to kick off with a band that started in Kansas City, Missouri, but then they moved to Florida, but I'm counting them here just because I already covered Florida, and I definitely want to bring up this band, and that is Angelcorpse with their second album, Exterminate. While a fair amount of people still associate this band with Florida, they started off in Kansas City, and this band is honestly still one of the heaviest bands I'd say that has ever existed within the loose boundaries of blackened death metal. I would even call it like blackened technical death metal because, my God, this band is absolutely insane, especially with this lineup. Gene Palabicki alone, that dude is an amazing riff writer. I had the pleasure of seeing him in Perdition Temple at Maryland Death Fest last year. Absolutely crushing set. But this lineup also featured Pete Helmkamp on bass and vocals, who is a member of Revenge. You had Bill Taylor, formerly of Immolation, which, yeah, I love Immolation, of course, and John Longstreth of Origin on drums. This album is fast, furious, hyper-aggressive, and again, technical in such a ferocious way. The riff changes are insane on here, going from like flat-out black metal to, again, like more technical death metal to thrash, like dude, War-Torn. War-Torn has some ferocious, thrashy riffs all over it. And John Longstreth's drum work on literally anything he's on is incredible. It keeps this album at such an intense pace that it can be dizzying at times, but at the same time, like, it's not technical in the sense where it's just like a lot of wankery. Like, this is just clever, intense riff work and sharp transitions, but all of it still just comes together rather smoothly for something that is just, again, so fucking ferocious. That Which Lies Upon is possibly one of my favorite tracks on here. I love the fact that the riff changes are like stylistic changes. It goes from like blackened tremolos to more just absolutely punishing death metal riffs on there. And Pete's vocals across the board, I really like this guy's delivery. He's got this thrashy snarl. It's very intelligible. They sound menacing and aggressive as hell, and it just sort of matches this intense whirlwind of just insanity on this album. This, I don't know, it might be my favorite one. It's hard to say. Like, I'm kind of a big fan of almost all of them except for maybe the last one. The last one just didn't hit as hard. But this album packs pretty much everything that I love about Angelcorpse. Again, just rapid fire, aggressive, blasphemous, and technical. Like, I would say, you know, Gene's a super underrated riff writer. Even the lead work on here is really solid, which I don't know if he and Bill were trading off or it was just Bill, but this is just an absolutely amazing album from start to finish. Every song on here is explosive. Hallelujah and Sons of Vengeance in particular, the stampeding grooves on those songs. I could continue gushing about this album, but I'm just gonna go ahead and say listen to it, check it out. If you are a big fan of like more technical death metal, but hyper aggressive technical death metal, like you want it to be like more riff oriented technical, but also just punishing as hell, check this album out, and then just check out pretty much the rest of Angelcorpse, and then go ahead and check out Perdition Temple because I feel like it's the spiritual successor. But yeah, check it out. Coalesce, a revolution in just listening. This is the third album from this KC-based metalcore, metallic hardcore, mathcore band. Actually, these guys are often cited as one of the like progenitors of the style of mathcore, along with like, you know, Botch and Dillinger Escape Plan. I believe this band might be slightly older than those two, so they might actually be legit like one of the first. I remember picking up this album used, and it was kind of a blind buy at the time. I was just looking for more random metal. I came across this lovely album cover. I was like, all right, I'm pretty sure that's metal. And this might be one of like the earliest Relapse Records releases that I snagged. Like, I think I got that and Brutal Truth's Sounds of the Animal Kingdom just because that cover was kind of fucked up. And admittedly at the time, I was not ready for this. Like, I was still listening to like a lot of Pantera and Prong, and I think I was kind of getting into like the nu metal thing too. So hearing this just intense, strange, spastic music, it was really hard for me to center in on, because at the time this was just nuts to me. And then over the years, I started listening to it more and I was like, huh, this actually kind of clicks. And that kind of happened along the same time I really started getting into bands like Every Time I Die too. Now this band has an interesting history. First off, this was almost their last album because they broke up not too long after this album came out, after their van broke down in like Idaho or Utah, and they were just like, fuck it, we're done. And this also features James Dewees, I can't remember how to pronounce his name, from Reggie and the Full Effect and the Get Up Kids. Like, this was another project that he was involved with, and people often forget that that guy has some like legit metal cred. But to me, this album is still relevant, and I think it has aged like a fine wine. The opening track on here, What Happens on the Road Always Comes Home, you get these crazy turnovers and blasts and these kind of like almost like retched vocals. Like, the guy's vocal style was always very distinct, but then it slides into like sludge metal riffs. Like, this honestly kind of sounds like a metallic hardcore version of Soylent Green at times. And despite this being like just like tons of crazy transitions, off-time drum patterns, out of nowhere fills, breakdowns, it can be surprisingly catchy. While the Jackass Operation Spins Its Wheels honestly is one of the catchier numbers on there, that broken down riff is just kind of infectious, and it kind of lays on like a more straightforward groove before going into these, again, crazy fills that come out of nowhere. Cowards.com has these awesome like off-time breakdown grooves. You get a lot of those, what I call alarm clock accents, where it just sounds like, you know, that same shitty alarm clock that woke me up, you know, every day for like middle school and grade school. If you're my age, we know which digital alarm clock that is, and it makes a horrible noise and you want to get up just to destroy the machine. But somehow in here, it's actually kind of cool because, I don't know, it just gives this album like this weird, nervous, kind of unsettling energy. Like, these songs are like just like emotional freakouts that settle into like fun riffy grooves every now and then. It's technical, but it's like off kilter and of course rife with cynicism. You could probably tell judging by a lot of the song titles and pretty much things like, oh yeah, no, I've seen like so many bands use these ironic song titles, and ironically, they kind of sound like this band. I like pretty much everything about this album. It's well mixed. The songs are strange and alluring and loaded with, again, just really interesting transitions and just like clever songwriting, but done, you know, in a sort of insane sort of way. The only track I don't like in here is the last track, They Always Come Home in the Fall, which is this creepy ambient track that closes out the album. Generally, I skip that one, but the rest of this, I think, is fantastic. If you're a big fan, again, of like Dillinger Escape Plan, Botch, I would say early Cave In, Burnt by the Sun, maybe even like a little bit of Glassjaw too, check this album out. It is still as vicious as it ever was, and yeah, I really wish this band would like reunite, but I don't know, I'm not going to hold my breath on that one. Ahtme, or however you say that word. Sewerborn. This is the debut album from this KC technical death metal act, modern death metal act. I don't know, it's kind of like a little bit of both. Now, as I said, this is their debut, technically, because this band had a different name before. They were called The Roman Holiday. They cut one album as The Roman Holiday and then changed their name and changed their style pretty drastically. They were pretty much a flat-out deathcore band before, and then they shifted gears to tech death, and they do it a lot better. I got into this band because I came across their video for the song Subservient, which is one of my favorite tracks on here, namely because the vocal patterns, the cadences, and how tight and just awesome and catchy it is, but also the video is pure lunacy with live footage spliced in it. I just recommend going and checking it out. It's just really strange. But this is one of those bands where you could say it's modern death metal or technical death metal, either would fit. This is more riff-oriented tech death, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, this is more about like fun riff patterns and clever hooks. It's not so much about like overloading this with like, you know, tons of shredding and arpeggios, and it's definitely more like along the brutal side. Like this definitely has a lot of stuff that is very comparable to like Aborted or even like Suffocation at times. But it has that like pinpoint precision and the breakdown grooves that you would hear with like Decapitated or Psychroptic. What this definitely is fun to listen to. Again, the drum patterns, there are lots of like these just fun syncopated grooves. The last track, Subhuman Remains, they break into this like very Surreption style breakdown on there, and they do these fun vocal cadences on top. The vocal cadences, I think, are one of my big standouts on here. Not only are they very clear, he also follows the just very clever breakdown riffs often, and even creates his own sort of like vocal patterns over the riffs instead of like just following them. Songs like Dig have these fun elastic tremolo riffs, and there's even like some touches of like Nihilish atmosphere. Like you get a little bit of an intro on Sea of Sand, and then you get into Summoning Sheba, and you get those very Nile Middle Eastern melodies. Those even carry over into The Stench of Farouk. But it's those go for the throat songs that I absolutely latch onto, like To Exist, Control, and Contort. This album is just flat out fucking fun. The only thing I don't like is they kind of do like a hidden track thing towards the end. Subhuman Remains itself is not a very long track, and it goes into like this long drawn out ambient end, and then you get this weird sample at the very end after some silence. I hate when albums do that, but outside of that, I love this. This is just quality modern / technical death metal. Again, if you're a big fan of Aborted, Decapitated, Psychroptic, and I'd even throw in Surreption in there too for a couple of moments on here. Check this out. This is just an absolutely banging album. Their second one's really good too, but this is kind of where I started, and this is the one I still just kind of come back to the most. Either way, check out this band. Anacrusis, Screams and Whispers. This is the fourth album from the St. Louis progressive / technical thrash metal act. This band's sound definitely evolved throughout the course of their 4 studio albums. I mean, all right, they technically have 5, but that one's re-recording, so I'm not going to count it really. And by that, this makes this their last studio album before breaking up the same year. And again, this band's evolution I thought was really interesting. Their first album is kind of a balls out, very aggressive thrash album. Still very technical. I would always say that this band is kind of like comparable to like Coroner in a way, I would say. But as it went on, you hear stuff that is more similar to Atheist, Cynic, and honestly the band Believer. Honestly, their career trajectory is kind of similar to Believer, where they started off again more like straightforward thrash, albeit, pretty technical, and then started moving into more progressive territory. And this is kind of where it all came together. The guitars, definitely way more thrash oriented, like they just have that big thrashy crunch. But vocally, they still employed a lot of clean vocals, as well as these high-pitched, very shrill screams. And the music is just really interesting. Like lots of intricate guitar work, lots of really lavish leads, and incredible drum work. Lots of like crazy off-time accents, crazy fills. It's very fluid though. This band definitely wanted to craft something that was their own, and while I can definitely draw a lot of comparisons to all the bands that I brought up, this still really does stand out on its own. Probably so much so that this band, I don't think ever truly found its place, at least in the metal scene. It was more of like, this like cool underground band that people were getting into just because they just sounded a little bit different. Their songwriting dynamics were a little bit more strange, a little bit more experimental. Like the song Division, you have these very soft, clean melodies and more spoken word vocals on top of a D beat, like a fast, thrashy beat that's notably more aggressive, creating this very interesting, contrast. And a lot of the music can kind of just go from that more delicate, more vulnerable side where, you get more clean singing and more soft melodies to flat out just disgustingly heavy sections. Division does pick up and get a lot heavier, and again, like the contrast between the vocals, again, those spoken word ones, the cleaner vocals, and the shrieks, which almost sound kind of blackened. It kind of gives this, band like this really cool experimental nature to it. I mean, they do get flat out heavier than hell. The song Grateful, probably the heaviest track on this album, more about the bone-crunching riffs. It's just notably more aggressive. The thrash roots come out a little bit more. The thrash break on Too Many Prophets as well, I think, is really awesome. You get the full-bore machine gun riffs, but it's this weird experimental nature in this album where they were just kind of willing to try all sorts of things. And sometimes it really worked, sometimes it didn't. Like the keys that show up on Too Many Prophets and I think it's Tools of Separation. Very strange sounding. Kind of like a music box, but it feels, I don't know, just kind of slightly off. The direction of this album is kind of all over the place, but it kind of lures you in with just really unique composition. To some people, this might sound like uneven and weird, but for me, like this, again, kind of falls in that category of bands like Voivod and Atheist, where experimentation is generally like kind of the key thing in the band's, you know, songwriting, all while trying to create catchy melodies but still remain like off the beaten path as far as like other bands musically. That would kind of describe Anacrusis. But I dig this album. Honestly, I dig all their albums, but for like different reasons. This is the one that I would say is probably my favorite overall. I'm a really big fan of that debut though. Now I believe this band is still around in terms of like a live capacity, but in terms of like, you know, releasing new music, but I haven't done that in a while. And again, I'm really not counting the re-recordings because, I mean, it's still old material. They just wanted better production on it, I guess. There might have been some reimaginings of some songs. I haven't heard it, but I strongly recommend all their albums, or like the 4 studio albums that I'm really talking about. If you're a big fan, again, of Coroner, Atheist, Voivod, and again, Believer too. Very similar to Believer. Check this album out. Damn good. The Lion's Daughter, Skin Show. This is the 4th album from this St. Louis-based progressive blackened sludge. I don't know. This band is strange. They were strange before this album. The 2 albums before this, which are the only other 2 that I own by this band, Existence is Horror and Future Cult, are both strange. Like, their style is just kind of hard to describe. And with this, it's still strange, but in a way it became easier to describe. This is blackened sludge with a huge hard-on for John Carpenter. Since I believe I've always been a part of this band's sound, at least, you know, in terms of what I have listened to by this band, but here they took on a flat-out John Carpenter slasher movie character that is undeniable. Like, this just has that sort of vibe. This is slasher movie sludge metal. And by that, this means this is a perfect spooky season listen. Like, this is like a combination of like, I don't know, having a metal show right next to like a goth club, and then right across the street at the matinee is like a John Carpenter horror movie marathon. It's all those things on one album. Now, while this is still kind of strange in comparison to a lot of music, this is notably more listenable than I would say like their other albums, where this is built on more straightforward grooves. The riffs are still heavier than hell. The vocals are these more tuneful bellows, and the synths really kind of supply a lot of the big melodies in here. Like the opening track on here, Become the Night, instant like anthem. Like, it's got this stomping rhythm to it. You get this big chorus with double time drums, and again, this synth pattern, this synth melody that carries it, absolutely is catchier than hell. And it's not just the melodies they play, it's the tones they use. It stays in this very John Carpenter-esque register, which is the only way I can think of in terms of how to describe it. Same thing with Neon Teeth, anthemic, driving, but dark. Then you get these kind of like more brooding, almost kind of like industrial-esque, kind of clubbish songs. The title track, Sex Trap and Snake Face, these song titles are fun. They're definitely more like that kind of like goth night sort of vibe. Like, there's definitely more of a huge synth presence on it. Even the song Dead in Dreams, that one is driven by these low, just rumbling synths and this broken down beat. But all of it is just incredibly catchy. Like, even though the vocals are definitely more gravelly, they're tuneful, there's actually good vocal hooks on here. And because they simplified a lot of the riff structure in here, like it's not as weird as the previous one, I feel like there's just more hooks on here. It's minimalist in terms of like all the elements they're blending in there, but it's very effective. And there's some fun references on here, like Werewolf Hospital is 100% gotta be a reference to American Werewolf in London, which is like one of my favorite horror movies ever. And a decidedly faster, blasty, more like angry song too, to kind of break up the pace of this. Same thing with Curtains too. That one's just got this really fun syncopated, like almost kind of like gallop to it. But it's fun because like when the vocals come in, there's like a different tempo to them, or like a different timing signature to them, and it kind of throws you off a bit. And the closer, The Chemist too, is another particular favorite. I like how it kind of lures you in with all this like more moody, dark, deliciously gothy, just textures and melodies and such, and then explodes into like more thrash metal riffs towards the end. This album is flat out awesome. It's probably my favorite thing that I've heard by them. I still haven't heard their most recent one because I don't think they ever released it on CD, and I hate downloading music and I don't collect vinyl or tapes, so hopefully they just put it out on CD so I can go get it because I kind of want it because I like this band. In terms of like comparing this to anything, it's kind of difficult. Like, I guess there's parts in here that kind of remind me of like Killing Joke a bit, maybe, but again with like sludge mixed in there and black metal, maybe that's the best I can do there. I don't know. This is just something you got to listen to. And if you dig it, make sure you introduce your friends to it around spooky season, and hopefully they dig it too, because I think this is, again, perfect Halloween music. It pairs lovely with a John Carpenter film fest, I'm sure. But yeah, check it out. Vampire Moose, Serenade the Samurai. This is the second album from the St. Louis-based groove metal / death metal act. I legit forget how I came across this band, but I did, clearly. And it probably had a lot to do with the name. But the second I jammed this album, I was like, dude, this is kind of cool. And, all right, going on the archives, it says groove metal. I would say this is definitely more focused on death metal, but it is a very groove-oriented style. Like, right from the opening song, Poor Turani, I don't even know how to say that. You get death metal chugs and tremolos. It's got these weird, interesting, kind of like angular riffs and breakdown patterns, and some absolutely just static drenched vocals. The frontman has this very strange vocal filter on here that, I don't know, it sounds like he's like screaming at the end of like an air conditioning duct, and they're just like distorting it with like TV static in the background. But it does give the music like a unique little trait there. But when it comes down to the music itself, this is really fun. Like, yeah, you look at this, it doesn't scream death metal, and you would expect some silliness, and believe me, there's definitely some silliness on here. In fact, there's even a song on here called Pujols, which is definitely named after Albert Pujols because they're from St. Louis and Cardinals. But if that didn't tip you off to the oncoming silliness on here, you still have 1.21 gigawatts, the third track, and track 8, Monster's Got a Motherfucking Bomb, which is all one word. Now, as silly as this definitely sounds, the music is really quite good, and these guys do a lot of fun stuff with groove and like drum patterns. Like the riffs and, you know, the drum syncopation here, it's interesting. Like, it's not like just straightforward 4/4 time grooves all the time. There's a lot of like clever syncopation. It's not just like, you know, a straightforward approach like you would hear in like Jungle Rod or Obituary, something like that. There's, I don't know, like a lot of like fun off time rhythms and such. Honestly, like this is almost like, I don't know, Melvin's inspired death metal in a way. And even the breakdowns aren't necessarily like straightforward like death metal breakdowns. There's definitely some more like metalcore-ish ones, like 1.21 gigawatts. There's honestly a little bit of like Coalesce sort of flavor on there in terms of it being a little bit spazzier and weird. Same thing on the title track here too. You get those like squawky alarm clock riffs, but lots and lots of like these broken up death metal tremolos and like these big old hefty chugs. And honestly, the whole thing is just kind of catchy and fun. Like you can groove along to this the entire time. But again, like the songwriting is just like a little bit like off kilter and strange. But as this album unveils its layers of weirdness, it showcases a lot of like fun, interesting songwriting dynamics. The two instrumentals on here, Sumatra and Esteban Was Eaten. Poor Esteban. Two of the most different tracks on here. Sumatra is a flat out like drum jam. There's lots of extra percussion. And again, you get to hear like their fun flair for just, you know, cool rhythms. And Esteban Was Eaten is almost like a psychedelic kind of like stonerish jam. Again, lots of fun percussion in there too, but it's definitely like a very different mood than say the rest of this, because this is definitely like aggressive and heavy, but again, it kind of thrives on being just a little bit strange too. And honestly, that's kind of my appeal for returning this, that, and again, these guys just know how to groove and have fun with it and not just sound like they're doing like very just basic stuff. This is yet another one in terms of like comparisons. It's kind of hard to make one. Like, again, it's got like a lot of like 90s death metal tropes, but it kind of has like a weird, I don't know, like heavy alternative vibe too. Like, I don't know where the hell this band fits in. I don't even know if the band knows or even cares where they fit in. or if they're even still around. I really didn't check that out. But I know that I dig this. This is a strange, fun, but very heavy album. And not necessarily one I would say is like on the outskirts of metal. This is definitely metal. It's just, I don't know, kind of its own weird thing. Check it out. It's a lot of fun. First album's pretty good too. It's got like some rap rock moments on it that are kind of odd, but honestly it kind of works, especially in the song Adamantium Elbow. This band just has a flair for interesting song titles. Just check them out. Trust me, this band is just delightfully weird. Timeghoul. This is a compilation of pretty much all of this Forestel death metal acts works. I was not aware of this band until I found out that this band was like one of the primary influences for Blood Incantation, and I really like Blood Incantation, so I really wanted to check them out. And then a fellow YouTuber, Levi, over at Thrashmaniac99, actually sent me a copy forever ago. This is a Dark Descent compilation, and I finally got to really sit down and absorb this because this includes both of their demos, 1992's Tumultuous Travelings and 1994's Panoramic Twilight, as well as a shitload of rehearsals too. And yeah, this is some really strange off-the-wall stuff. And yeah, once you listen to this and then listen to Blood Incantation, it's going to be pretty damn apparent that Blood Incantation was pretty influenced by this band. Like, there's definitely a lot of stuff that you could draw comparisons to, like Immolation, Morbid Angel. It's very strange, very dissonant, less contemporary than both. And not saying that, like, Immolation in particular is very contemporary, but even in comparison to that band, the song structures are very strange. Lots of dissonant, angular, murky riffs, twisting atmosphere. The vocals are varied throughout, like on both demos. They're just, again, very strange. You go from like deep cavernous howls to just straightforward growls, and then some like clean chanting every now and then. I'll be honest, the demos sound really solid. Like, they did a pretty good job cleaning these up, I imagine. But it's all about this weird cosmic atmosphere and these kind of like undulating songs and transitions within them. There's not a lot of songs in either demo either. They favor longer song structures with these weird, elaborate bridges. And as strange as they sound and as technical as they are, it's really quite engaging in terms of like what they do. If this band hadn't been so short-lived, I'm pretty sure we'd probably be talking about them more. I think they probably would have stood out even in terms of like 90s death metal with their just bizarre song structure, because like legit, I think if they were given like a proper studio recording, we would probably at least have like one full length we'd talk about with, you know, great admiration as to how it pushed the limits of death metal. Or who knows, we might have like the polar reaction that, you know, some people have with Blood Incantation was like, no, these guys created hipster death metal, and I have to hate them for it. Now, sadly, they didn't list the songs in the back, but I do remember the song Gut Spawn off of the first demo being a big standout. I particularly like the just absolutely bizarre riff structure on there, and crazy drum work on here too. Like jazz fusion stuff mixed with like just hefty death metal blasts. There isn't much in here that I would call like very contemporary death metal, even in terms of like more technical stuff. Like even in comparison to like Incantation, this is by far even weirder. And honestly, they got even stranger on the second demo. Like that one was way more elaborate. You had like what sounded like choirs of like bellows and such. The transitions were even more elaborate. Like you would get into like these big synthy passages of atmosphere, and then again bone crunching huge like Morbid Angel style riffs. The second demo in particular, I would say, is just kind of a template for Blood Incantation sound, pretty much right from Starspawn. It's more lavish and over the top, and I like the fact that within a very short period of time, this band was really pushing themselves creatively and really kind of pushing forward in terms of like death metal sound. But again, this was kind of like relegated to the underground because the band was very short-lived. But if you do come upon this compilation here, I strongly recommend it. This is legit some of the craziest death metal that came out in the 90s that not many people actually knew about. I mean, unless you were probably from Missouri, then maybe you actually got to see them live. I don't know. I know that this is an absolutely wild listen. The rehearsals, that's on the second disc, honestly, I mean, it's cool hearing them like kind of just jam out, and it's incredibly raw, but I kind of generally skip them. The 2 demos though, trust me, check them out. It's just strange and weird, and again, if you're a big Blood Incantation fan, and, you know, Morbid Angel, Incantation, Immolation, stuff like that too, but mainly Blood Incantation, this is, I would say, kind of a must listen for you guys if you haven't checked it out. King's X, Gretchen Goes to Nebraska. This is the 3rd or 2nd album. It depends if you count the whole sneak preview thing when they had a different name. Anyway, we'll go with 3rd album since I guess people count that. From this Springfield, Missouri, prog rock, hard rock, alt metal. I don't know what to consider this band. I kind of don't really think they're necessarily metal. I don't know. I might bring that up in that particular segment, but I love this band, and this is a band that I've only recently got into, namely because Jeff over at Gas Mask and Hand Grenades badgered me about it for long enough. Like, you know what? Fine, I'll check them out if it shuts them up. And I checked them out, and I liked them, and it didn't shut them up one bit. But this 3-piece, Doug Pinnick, Ty Tabor, and Jerry Gaskill, honestly, I would say is one of the best 3 pieces in rock, heavy music in general. Some absolutely fine songwriters that I think were like hyper influential, but really never got their credit. Like, I know tons of bands used to praise them. Like, I know Pearl Jam used to praise them, and a lot of the grunge bands did. Dimebag and Vinnie were apparently huge fans too. And this band, they had this really cool, accessible sound that covered a lot of ground. Like, it was hard rock at times. It had more metallic moments for sure. There was elements of funk. There's soul and I would say like gospel music woven in here too. And a good chunk of this is done with a progressive flair that is almost similar to Rush in a way. But while they definitely found like a solid, you know, very passionate fan base, they never broke as big as a lot of people thought they would just because of the quality of the songs. And these guys can write incredible hooky songs. The opening track in here, Out of the Silent Planet, absolutely beautiful vocal harmonies. The guitar work is lush and expansive. Doug Pinnick's bass work is ridiculously good. It's right on par with his amazing vocals too, his soulful, raspy delivery. And throughout this album, they showcase a lot of diversity in their sound, like Mission, that has like an almost like gospel start to it. In fact, I think it kind of like bookends it a bit. Don't Believe It, It's Easier Said Than Done, has some more, I would say like Asian melodies. Like you get a lot of those like Japanese strings that show up and really complement the songs well. There's like some spacey, more cosmic proggy stuff on here too. There are funky breakdowns everywhere, especially in like the more rockin' tracks like, you know, Over My Head, Summerland. Summerland's infectiously catchy. Like that vocal hook in the chorus is, I mean, it's a simple refrain of the title for the most part, but man, it's just great. Pleiades in particular, like the vocal harmonies on that one, probably my favorite. Honestly, they sound a lot like Alice in Chains. And I mean, I'm reasonably sure Alice in Chains also probably checked out these guys and probably heard those vocal harmonies like, yeah, we can do that, except let's just make it more depressing and dark. As far as like flat out heaviness in here, like, yeah, the rockers definitely are more energetic, more up-tempo. This is not their heaviest album. I would say that probably goes to Dogman, and I thought about bringing that one up just because it kind of fit more with like the metal theme, but in terms of like a personal favorite, this one, God, self-title is really good too. I don't know. It's really hard to pick with this band. These guys are just really solid songwriters, but this band just doesn't need to necessarily be like super heavy to just really just capture my attention and make me go, wow, that was one hell of a song. So yeah, not really metal. Don't really care. I think this band is absolutely amazing. I'll probably bring them up in the heavy but not metal, or Are They? And I probably already spoiled it that I don't really think they're necessarily a metal band, but I don't care. They're awesome. If you've never checked them out and you're a big fan of, oh man, dude, it's kind of hard to say. I mean, there's definitely a lot of grunge stuff in there. Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam, just, you know, no shitty Eddie Vedder vocals in there. There's stuff in here I would compare to like Faith No More, Living Colour. It's just sort of an all over the place sort of band, and even from album to album, it gets really different. Just check them out. Trust me, it's just quality tunes. That's what it is. Stormruler, Under the Burning Eclipse. This is the debut album from this St. Louis melodic black metal act. This band, baseline, I think they love Emperor and Dissection almost as much as they love Dark Souls and Bloodborne, which I believe every song in here is themed after. Now, I have never played those games or any of their spin-offs. I see lots of highlights on them and all the gruesome deaths and absolute frustration that game causes. In fact, recently I saw a clip of a man that got killed by a creature that literally pulled out his character's asshole and then took his character's ripped out asshole and jammed it into its own asshole. I don't even really know how to process that. Like, dude, that's like beyond gruesome. It was gruesome when you just did the first thing. The second thing was just like, dude, why? Pretty sure the creature moaned too while it was doing the whole insertion. I feel like I might be kink shaming a little bit here, so I'm going to get right back to this album, which is awesome. This is grand, epic, blasty as hell. If I didn't know this band was from Missouri, I would never guess they were from Missouri. Like, this sounds so fiercely Scandinavian that I couldn't imagine it coming from anywhere else but Scandinavia, maybe Germany. Crisp production, huge guitars, pummeling drums throughout. This is very fast-paced, but also very lavish, very melodic, like tons of soaring melodies across this entire album. Big guitar harmonies. Even at points I would say it gets heavy and brutal enough where it kind of borders into like blackened death metal territory, like the song Reign of the Winged Duke, which I have to say that this album has an interlude in between every song, as well as an intro and an outro. Now, that is beyond annoying. I love the music on here, but Jesus Christ, dude, like this is like my worst nightmare in terms of like interludes, because I hate those things. And I legit had to remove each interlude in terms of like ripping into my hard drive, because it was like, dude, no, this is just irritating now. I made it through a couple, but I'm not doing any more than like 3. But back to the music, which honestly, I absolutely love. The songs, again, lavish, lots of dynamic to them. They're boisterous. They're, again, triumphant, but they're triumphantly evil. The title track in here, honestly, is one of my favorite tracks. It brings in some more Middle Eastern melodies, very much akin to bands like Necrowretch and, of course, Melekesh, which I love that band. And there's also a lot of good thrash metal breaks in here, which, you know what, I would read through all these, but again, I can't remember which ones are interludes and which ones are the actual tracks, because I only wrote down partial notes. This is annoying, but I love the music. The music on here is absolutely amazing. I do believe they have a follow-up to this. I really haven't had a chance to check it out. Now, there is a follow-up to this, and I was gonna snag it, but I also saw that that one had an interlude between every track and intros and outros. Once again, I was like, come on, guys. Everything else you do is awesome. Why do you need that much atmosphere? Like, seriously, every riff on here I absolutely love. They're catchier than hell, great melodies. But again, I don't want to sit through what feels like a cutscene in a video game between every track. Like, some of them are like 30 seconds. Some of them are over a minute. I don't care. But it's your band. You guys do what the hell you want. I'm just here to tell you that your music is absolutely awesome. If you're a big fan, again, of, I would say, like Dissection and Emperor, but also, again, you know, Melekesh, Necrowretch, there's some stuff in here that remind me a bit of like Noctum too, or even like a little bit of like Merrimack. Just like big, grand black metal that is not afraid to be just fiercely melodic, but also just flat out fierce too. If any of that sounds good to you, check this out. And again, just don't forget you can always skip those interludes. Summoning the Lich Under the Reviled Throne. This is the second album from the St. Louis-based melodic death metal, deathcore, I don't know. Like, I would say more like modern death metal. I've always compared this band a bit to Black Dahlia Murder, which is not really a dig at all because I love that band. I got into them with their first album, which really sounded like Black Dahlia Murder. And this album, I feel like they took a huge stride forward in terms of making their sound more dynamic. And, you know, it still definitely has some stuff that sounds like Black Dahlia Murder, but also like Cattle Decapitation, and maybe a bit of Decapitated too. This band's sound is tight, fast, vicious, but also fiercely melodic. And one of the things that I really love about this band, in terms of themes, this band is more geared towards like fantasy, like wizards, warriors, and, you know, all that stuff, which is a theme that really isn't prevalent that much in like death metal itself. Generally get a lot of gore, Satan, violence, all that stuff. I kind of like it when a band takes on like a slightly different theme, but it still sounds heavy and vicious. It's constantly on the attack, but again, it will still like dazzle you with a lot of melody and a lot of clever technical play. The vocals on here too are absolutely awesome. This guy's high-low flip is honestly kind of right up there with Trevor's, even occasionally a little bit like Travis's as well. But in comparison to their first album, I think they improved across the board. The songs are tighter, they're more memorable, more hooky, and the breakdowns in here are absolutely punishing, like kind of like aborted level breakdowns. The Forest Feast and Potion Cellar in particular just have some absolutely disgusting syncopated chugs and breakdowns with really clever guitar work on top. Like that's not just, you know, a lot of like heavy open chugging. They include so much melody, and the drum performance on here is just absolutely nuts. There's more atmosphere. I feel like the album has like a broader scope than before, and it's flat out brutal in points. Like the Forest Feast, honestly, there are points in there that border on brutal death metal. There are some slam riffs that show up every now and then to kind of, you know, really give it like an extra punch. My Horrors Unending have some super low gutturals on there, like it sounds like a drain being unclogged. And Will to Survive, man, there's some ferocious gravity blasts on there too. So this album has a lot of appeal to a lot of different sects. Like, yeah, baseline, sure, you could say it's very much like Cattle Decap and Black Dahlia Murder, but I think this would appeal to fans of like just modern death metal in general. And to a degree, maybe like some of the deathcore fans, like I hear maybe like a little bit of deathcore in here. It's mostly in the breakdowns and such, but for the most part, I would say that this is like flat out death metal. And the contrast between this being like very melodic at points and just exceptionally brutal too, as well as with the themes, like the tone and the level of aggression on this album is just absolutely nasty. But when you consider the themes on here, like, yeah, they're dark, but again, you have those more fantasy-driven themes, and that just kind of gives it, like, I don't know, like a different appeal. And the production here being, like, a little bit more slick and a little bit more modern, it doesn't feel intrusive when it comes down to any of the extra epic atmosphere in here. Like, it's done very tastefully. It doesn't, like, overwhelm the song with a lot of, like, extra synths and atmosphere and orchestral stuff. It stays very much rooted on the riffs, the brutality, and, well, all the important stuff. So yeah, if you're a big fan of, I mean, Black Dahlia Murder, Cattle Decap, I would also say Psychroptic and Decapitated to a degree. Check this album out. Absolutely killer stuff. Looking forward to whatever comes out next from this band because I feel like they're getting better with each release so far. So yeah, check it out. Troglodyte, welcome to Boggy Creek. This is the debut album from this KC Sasquatch-themed death metal act. I was just intrigued by pretty much the album cover, which is absolutely amazing. Like, this is some like old school VHS horror greatness right here. But then I heard them, and this is absolutely ridiculous, but in all the right ways. I would describe this band style as more brutal death metal. Like, it definitely has its roots in old school death metal, but there's lots of like heavy slam chugs and, you know, like that more brutal death metal sound that you would associate with like Dying Fetus or Gorgasm or, you know, stuff like that. There's enough of a balance between like brutal death metal and old school death metal in here that, I mean, I'm still getting like stuff that reminds me of like Jungle Rot and Obituary, but also again, like Internal Bleeding. And again, this crazy Sasquatch theme on here, which is just fun as hell. And the song titles are pretty much as fun as the music. Let's see, you have Symphonies of Sasquatch, Mummified Yeti Hand, Bring Me the Head of Bigfoot, Hit by the Hendersons, which I believe is like one of the shortest tracks on here. It's almost kind of like a grindcore fit. But this band is like ridiculously tight. Like the drum performance on here is awesome. Love the more like kind of raw production. The guitars have this absolutely nasty crunch. And of course the vocals are appropriately guttural as hell because, I mean, this is a Sasquatch themed band. It should sound like it's fronted by Sasquatch. You get a lot of brutal death metal blasting in here, but again, like those old school death metal grooves and just good old riff and chug. And occasionally some more melodic spots, like Fight for Your Life. There's some really cool riff changes in there. They're a little bit more harmonized, I would say. And of course, there's a ton of solid grooves. That's pretty much across every song on here. They Walk Among Us might have one of my favorites. It's what I would call like a Sasquatch slam. Like, it's just flat out heavy and dumb. And I like the fact that they layer up the vocals occasionally in terms of like Sasquatch gang vocals, I guess. If this band wasn't having a ton of fun with all the themes and just how like kind of over the top and silly this is, then they were doing it wrong, because this is awesome for multiple reasons. Again, I like bands with weird themes, and I like flat out awesome old school death metal. And yeah, this does both really well. If you're a big fan, again, of, I would say, like Internal Bleeding, Jungle Rod, probably Broken Hope too, and definitely some Dying Fetus too, check this album out. I still need to check out more by this band, but yeah, this is just an absolutely fun, ridiculous release. Check this band out. This album is as heavy as it is ridiculous. And finally, we have Everything Went Black, Cycles of Light. This is the lone full length from the St. Louis-based hardcore acts, maybe metallic hardcore. It really feels more straight ahead hardcore overall. Like, it's got the D beats. It feels a little bit more centered on hardcore rather than metal. Like, you do have some more metal moments, but this was one that, I kind of blind bought years ago just because it was on Prosthetic Records, and I loved it. I actually come back to this one quite frequently, but the band kind of just ended up disappearing. I actually considered doing like a retro review for it, but I don't know how many people actually know about this band. And there really isn't like a tremendous amount of information out there as to where like all the other members went or what actually happened, but I can say that this album is awesome. It's dark, it's very bleak, it's more negative sounding hardcore / metallic hardcore. If I was gonna call it more metallic hardcore, it's kind of closer to like Converge or Integrity. Like lots of D beats, lots of snarling, vicious atmosphere. The vocals have a way more hardcore approach than anything remotely metal. That isn't to say it's not heavier than hell. Like Gods of Atlantis, Thorn Feeders, big D beat driven, galloping, just explosive songs, just packed to the brim with angst. Parades also is kind of that, but it also ends the song on this heavy, droning, lumbering, more atmospheric note, which this album surprisingly has like a fair amount of like more atmosphere and like kind of like open sections before it just, takes off and just throttles you again with more D beats and just, again, hefty downpicked riffs. There's even strings at the end of Parades too, which kind of gives it this like beautiful somber closer, but a lot of this vicious. The songs are generally very explosive, but again, like, I don't know, they feel cold and dark. And I kind of like this vibe of like, it's, kind of depressive in a way in spots, but again, it's still got that, like raw, hardcore anger that I look for. And it also works well with the transitions. This band is really good about going from brooding and simmering to just outright detonating in a lot of these songs. Now, this might be the only thing they ever released on CD. I don't know if the band is still around, like in terms of like, again, finding anything on this band. It's hard to say. They might have broken up. Honestly, with the rise of like, metallic hardcore here lately, this would be an awesome time for them to come back and crank out another killer album. But that might not be in the cards for them. Hell, they might not even be together anymore. Either way, though, if you just like nasty hardcore, again, a lot of Integrity and Converge vibes, but also like stuff kind of like Trap Them too without the HM2 guitars. Check this out. It's a vicious listen from start to finish. Again, it's kind of cold and dark hardcore, and I really dig it. And this will probably be the only thing I ever own by them, because all their other stuff is either on like vinyl or tape, or it's a long lost demo of some kind. But thankfully, I at least have this. So yeah, check this one out. Damn good stuff. And that will do it for Missouri. I already have the next one put together. I just have to film it. And yeah, we're going to get back to doing some collection updates too. Already kind of working on a massive stack there. But if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you are new to the channel, subscribe, because we do stuff like this all the time. We have memberships. They are only 99 cents, and our lone perk is doing a members only live stream, which we will be doing one soon, or we already have. It depends on when this video comes up, but we try to do one at least once a month if we can. The memberships are the new way to support the channel more directly. We also still have our store with our hats and shirts. That is linked down below in the video description. And of course, there's a join button down here someplace if you would like to become a member of this channel. But regardless of whether you become a member or not, we appreciate all the support you guys have given us over the years. It is still amazing doing this. I know I say the same stuff pretty much after all of these videos, but I mean it. And, I'll stop saying it when I stop meaning it, which that hasn't happened yet, because I'll always be appreciative of all the support you guys have given us over the years. This has been an absolutely amazing run. I can't believe we hit 20,000 subscribers. That just blows my mind. And we plan on just overloading you guys with more content out there. So one more big thank you, because you guys are absolutely awesome, and we will catch you later.